Today we are going to be talking about Gibson guitars, specifically the Norlin era of Gibson guitars, which is one of their most debated time periods in their history. A while back we did a video checking out 70s Fender, kind of checking out the heart of the CBS era after Fender was bought out by CBS, and seeing if those guitars still hold up today and if those are kind of a hidden gem or if they're not the best. So today what we wanted to do was do that for Gibson. Let's see what Gibson was doing in that time period, as it's definitely pretty interesting. You can draw a lot of comparisons between the Fender CBS era and the Gibson Norlin era. They both came right after their kind of golden age. Those guitars made from the 50s and 60s and went all the way to the mid 80s, and you saw a lot of kind of cost cutting and different changes happening within the landscape of how they're making their guitars. Both eras of these instruments are widely debated today if they're anything cool. We're fortunate enough to see quite a bit of both of those eras at the shop, so we're gonna dig into a few of these Gibson Norlin era guitars. The Norlin era would begin in 1969 and go all the way up until 1985, and you kind of see changes happening to their production all along the way. The story of golden era Gibson and Fender has been told a million times, so we're not going to totally rehash that here, but just to set the stage. The 50s and early 60s would of course be a golden era for Gibson and Fender. The companies were both developing what we now know as their most iconic guitar models of all time, such as the Les Paul, Stratocaster, Telecaster, 335, SG, and many more. As the electric guitar's popularity skyrocketed within pop culture, the demand for these electric guitars would skyrocket as well. This of course meant that more money was starting to enter the industry, and corporate conglomerates definitely took note and started to be interested. From the mid to late 60s, both Fender and Gibson would be bought out. In 1965, Fender would be bought out by CBS, and 4 years later, Gibson would be bought out by ECL, the Ecuadorian land company. The way this worked is that ECL was able to take over CMI, Chicago Musical Instruments, which owned Gibson, and so under ECL's control, now they also own Gibson. ECL would later be known as Norlin, and that is what gave this era its name. As with any corporate buyout, changes would start happening almost immediately to Gibson with regards to their production. Let's illustrate that by checking out a guitar. Here we have a 1974 Gibson Les Paul Custom. One of the biggest changes that Gibson would make to their guitar production was pancake bodies. This is where they would take two pieces of mahogany and join them with a maple strip in between, and then they would put a maple top on top of all of that. What this meant was that they could use less than perfect cuts of wood. They could use smaller pieces of wood, and this also led to less excess wood, so it just kind of cut down on costs overall. And it also made these guitars a lot heavier, which they've definitely gained a reputation for since. You'd also see some changes happening to the headstock, not just aesthetically, but you'd also see the addition of a volute. Gibson guitars at the time were already becoming pretty notorious for having headstock breaks and that being kind of a failure point, so they did this to kind of mitigate that. Another thing they did was they changed the angle of the headstock. They went from 17 degrees down to just 14 degrees, so it didn't have as strong of a break angle. In theory, this makes it a little stronger. This also helps with the kind of string break angle over the nut, which can kind of give better intonation in theory. Between all these things, it's supposed to kind of make this a little bit stronger. I don't know how successful they were at that. I definitely still see Gibsons of this era with headstock breaks, but probably less than normal, I would say. So at least somewhat successful. It is funny that if you're a Gibson purist, then you probably don't like what's going on with the headstock here, but then some people who are maybe less purists, who are more critical of Gibson, will say that this is probably a better headstock design. It's kind of funny. Anytime Gibson tries to do something new, some people love it, some will hate it, and they're still trying stuff to this day, and they still get the same reaction. Another interesting change with regards to the neck was making all the necks three-piece now. This in theory made them stronger, but also of course was a cost-cutting measure. Again, some people like this, some people not so much. You'd see this not only on their electrics, but also their acoustics. So with all these changes, how are these guitars from a practical sense? This is a really, really great Les Paul. I absolutely love the neck profile on this one. It's kind of thin, so I personally really enjoy that. Pretty quick, actually. This is quite heavy, but it does sound really good. When you dig in, it really does have like a nice growl to it, which for me, that's definitely one of the things that I would look for in a Les Paul custom. Overall, this is a very solid Les Paul custom. Very different from the 60s Les Paul customs, very different from a modern Les Paul custom. Definitely its own flavor. I definitely see why the custom has become one of the most well-regarded guitars of the Norlin era, as this is definitely its own thing and very different from anything else you'd usually see out of a Les Paul custom. As I just mentioned, they also made a lot of changes to their acoustic guitars at the time. This is a 1977 Gibson Hummingbird custom, and it's in really, really great shape for its age. You'll see on this example that 3-piece neck, which is very interesting for an acoustic, but it kind of works here. Very cool. But this is a great sounding acoustic, so let's throw a mic in front of this and see what it sounds like. Once again, this is definitely different than what you would expect from like a modern Hummingbird or a 50s or 60s Hummingbird. This very much does its own thing. It's very articulate and definitely has like a nice warmth to it. Overall, very solid acoustic. I know there's a lot of acoustics we can say this about, but this is one of those where playing wise, if we're being honest, it's a little bit clunky, but it sounds so good that it's definitely worth the work. This one actually set up pretty well, so the action is low and I like all that, but I don't know, this one's just not like my favorite. I would probably prefer a more modern one playing wise, or even like a 50s or 60s example. Definitely its own flavor here, and sound wise I do like it a lot, but playing wise, it's not my favorite Hummingbird I've ever played. If you guys are enjoying the video so far, we'd love if you consider liking and subscribing. It helps us out a bunch. As the 70s would progress, a few of the changes that Gibson made earlier on would actually be walked back, such as the pancake bodies. This is a 1978 Gibson Les Paul custom. Triple pickup, which is very sick. You'll just see a solid mahogany body again here. Otherwise, very similar appointments. You still get the 3-piece neck, you still get the volute, but things are definitely starting to change a bit by this point. As well as changing the designs of some of their most iconic guitars, the Norlin Era would also introduce a handful of new Gibson models. A personal favorite of mine is the Gibson RD, released in 1977. We unfortunately don't have one of those to demo today, but we definitely need to do that in a future video, so hopefully we'll get one of those in soon. As well as a plentiful amount of Les Paul customs and other high-end guitars, Gibson will also explore some more affordable guitars during this time period. Throughout these years, Gibson would introduce the Marauder, S1, and Sonex. Here we have a 1983 Gibson Sonex 180, a very budget-focused guitar, and this is the one that you heard at the beginning of the video. This guitar actually features a bolt-on neck, which is definitely a rarity for Gibson, but it kind of works here. I absolutely love this guitar for what it is. It's definitely a little bit quirky and it does not feel like the Les Paul custom, but it does its own thing and it's really, really cool. Gibson doesn't really offer anything just like this in their current lineup, and I really wish they did. They don't necessarily need to do another bolt-on. They could do this as a set neck. Very solid guitar. Kind of looking at market value and stuff, this is definitely one of my favorite picks from this era. These pickups sound great. The guitar is very simple, and you'll love to see it. As well as introducing their extremely budget-focused guitars, they also started to have some stuff available kind of between those and a standard. On the Les Paul side of things, they had the Paul, or the Firebrand. This example in particular is from 1980. And this kind of is somewhere between like a Les Paul Studio and Les Paul Special. Very stripped back, very simple, no frills, but sounds great and just very solid Les Paul overall. They also did a The SG model, same sort of thing as this, and those are also really cool. You're still getting a 3-piece neck on this. I think you're actually getting 5 pieces on the headstock there, so A lot going on. This era of Gibson is not held in the highest regard by many, and I think it's for similar reasons to Fender. This era came right after their golden age, and a lot of stuff changed, and in a lot of ways these guitars weren't as good as those in the years prior. I think a lot of these ideas brought forth in the Norlin era heavily inspire what we have today from Gibson, with guitars like the Sonex and the Paul definitely paving the way for models like the new Gibson Les Paul Modern Light. Despite its mixed reception, Gibson still does pay homage to this era today. They currently offer a 70s Explorer, 70s Flying V, and 70s Les Paul Deluxe, all reminiscent of this era. I think one thing that's really interesting with these Norlin era guitars is where they fall price-wise in the vintage market. Most of these guitars will definitely go for more than a used modern Gibson, but they're not gonna be a crazy premium. Obviously, the older you go in these years, the more the price will kind of raise with a lot of the stuff. But a lot of these guitars are still very attainable. These are still true 40 to 50 plus year old vintage guitars, and while they're not of the golden era, they still are definitely vintage in their own right, and I think definitely deserve their place. So is tracking down a guitar from this era worth it? I think that really depends what you're looking for. If you're someone that's looking to get into a golden era vintage Gibson, but you maybe don't have the 5-figure budget or more that it would require to get into that, you're thinking maybe I'll go to something from the 70s so it's a little more attainable. I don't know if I would do that. These guitars are so different from the 50s and 60s guitars that they don't really do the same thing. I would probably look more towards something from the custom shop or even like an older like 90s Gibson USA. That era definitely deserves its own video as well. But if you're someone that does like the spec changes of these years, you like the 70s aesthetics and you like what they were doing at the time, I would definitely check out these guitars. I think overall, if you like these guitars for what they are and you're open to some of these interesting specs, they're definitely well worth the money, and I would try to get your hands on them and check them out. If you've never played a guitar from this time period before, I would definitely try and play one before purchasing one, especially if you've only played modern Gibsons, as these are just so different than that. There's definitely a lot of cool stuff that happened within the Norlin era. This era of Gibson is certainly not perfect, and I think when compared to Fender, they probably strayed even further from their origins. If you're looking for 50s or 60s, this is not that. But this stuff is definitely cool. It has its own flavor. My favorite guitars of this era are probably the two extremes. I really like the budget-focused stuff like the Sonex for what it is, and I also absolutely love the Gibson Les Paul Customs of this era. On a personal note, I really wish that they would do like a reissue of the Sonex, maybe even do it with a set neck. If they could do that for like around $1,000, I think that would do wonders for the Gibson company. I don't think that they offer enough in that price range, and I think because of that, I don't see a lot of younger players playing Gibson guitars. I definitely see a lot of younger players playing Fender, as the entry point is a lot more attainable there. But Gibson has kind of positioned themselves to be only like a luxury premium brand, it feels like sometimes. To me, that's not really what the brand is. Yes, I think that Gibson is more of a luxury brand than Fender is, but that doesn't mean they need to be unattainable. We always talk about like the MO with Fender was definitely to make like the working person's modular guitar, and I think they succeeded on that. And I think if you even look at like the Fender Mexico lineup today, well, maybe design-wise, it's not the same as the 50s or 60s. The MO is very similar, and I think it kind of accomplishes what they sought out to do. With Gibson, on the other hand, they definitely were going more for like, we're gonna just make the best guitars that we can on a production basis, and it wasn't about it being modular, it wasn't about it being the cheapest, but these guitars were never like crazy expensive. The Les Paul price has actually stayed pretty similar since its original release in the 50s, if you factor inflation. I think when comparing what Gibson is doing now between the Gibson brand and the Epiphone brand, and then looking back at what they were doing during the Norlin era, I think what they really got right in the Norlin era that they're not getting now is that attainable, USA-made, Gibson-branded guitar. Now, obviously, Gibson is trying to get there with their Epiphone line. They're trying to get people in with the Epiphone import guitars, but we all know it's not the same. Epiphone obviously does a lot of really cool stuff. They do it at a very attainable price point, and I would say the quality has actually improved a lot in recent years, so that's cool. We love that. But it's not the same, and I think in order to get people to get into the Gibson line, they should kind of look back at what they were doing during this time period. And yes, I fully understand how difficult that can be. It is very expensive to make stuff here in the States, and the prices on that are only increasing. If they wanted to make it happen, they'd make it happen. Let us know down below in the comments, what are your thoughts on the Norlin era? Do you own any guitars from this era? We would love to read your stories. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. I hope you guys enjoyed going through all these guitars with us. This one was a lot of fun to do, and definitely want to do more videos like this in the future. If you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment on this video, and all that good stuff. And we will see you in another video soon. Bye.